because we don't believe in overtime on this channel, because overtime leads to burnout. What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today I will be discussing what we can learn from the Agile Project Management methodology and improve the way we approach work. And you might be asking, what is this Agile methodology that I talk about? Well, it's a project management methodology that focuses on breaking the process of managing usually a software project into stages of planning, development, and evaluation. And throughout the entire process, the key is to constantly collaborate between stakeholders and in every single stage of this process to iterate and improve what is being worked on and what is being done and how it's being done. So constant improvement is a key principle in Agile development. And I'll leave links down below if you want to learn more about Agile developments. If you've been following me on Instagram, you know that I have recently completed a specialization on software product development that focused on Agile principles as well as Scrum. So I'll leave a link to that particular specialization and the courses down below, so that if you are interested in learning more about product management, you can go ahead and check that out on Coursera. I really recommend it. It focuses more on understanding the process of developing software rather than necessarily the question of how to become a product manager. As a systems project manager, I found it incredibly helpful just to understand both how product managers and product owners work, but also how to better involve all the stakeholders into the process. And that is what we'll be talking about today. And I think there are plenty of things that we can learn from Agile methodology and Agile principles that we can just take into how we approach work overall, because that whole idea of collaboration and iteration to make things better is actually something that can be really useful in just everyday work. I have 8 things that I am going to take with me and also start implementing in my everyday work, not just in project management. Before we kick things off, if you really like content like this, consider subscribing, and if you want content like this on a daily basis, follow me on Instagram, because I am posting there on pretty much a daily basis about nerdy things like this. So if this is something that you could consider, following along on, that's where you find me. In any way, let's go. The first one is always iterate and never try to make something perfect on the first try. A key principle of Agile is that the process is broken down into stages, but you don't just go over one of the stages and then you move to the next one, and then once you get through all of the stages, you're ready. No. That would be more on the sort of traditional waterfall models of project management. In Agile, you can iterate within a stage of the process, but you can also iterate throughout the entire project, throughout all of the stages. So basically planning, development, and evaluation. And that's the whole point. You're not trying to create a perfect software product, out of the blue, like on the first try, because that would mean that you need to know what perfect means when you start. And actually at the beginning of everything, there's a lot of uncertainty of what does the customer want, what does the client want, what's perfect, is there such a thing as perfect, what works. So as it is in normal work life, you don't always know what the ideal end result would be, but you want to start by creating sort of a minimum viable product or a first version, and then get feedback and then iterate on that so that you can make it better, but make it better in a way that is actually going to resonate with whoever is going to be your audience for what you're working on. So that's one thing that I am definitely going to implement more in my work. I tend to have a bit of perfectionist tendencies in some things, and so getting feedback on early versions and then iterating and going from there to make sure that what I'm creating is actually usable and user-friendly and all the good things to whoever I'm making it for is key. So always iterate. Don't try to make things perfect, number 1. Number 2 is define done. And this happens even before any work product is started on in Agile. So what defining done means is that when you have a task or you have an area of responsibility, before you even start working on that, you think, what's your goal with this? What is this meant to do? And then you define exactly what done looks like. Does it have to pass any test? Does it have to get an approval from someone? What does it have to do or look like? And once you have a very clear definition of at which point can I stop working on this and consider this finished, when you have that, then you start working. You don't start with a wishy-washy idea of what the task results should look like, because then you end up wasting time, and that is not very agile. So what you want to do is, when you start working on, I don't know, let's say an email, maybe your definition of done is that you have an outline, like these are the things that I need to include and explain, and my goal is that when someone has read this email, this is their takeaway. So you write the email and you check that every single thing that you wanted to include is on the email. You maybe have someone read it over and you give them like, does this come across from this email? They say yes, and you're like, God, this is done. And that's kind of the idea of defining done before you start, so that you don't end up, nitpicking and trying to put in work that marginally makes it better but doesn't actually create any significant additional value to what you're working on. So that is why you define the goal and define what done looks like early on, so that you don't end up wasting time and effort. Which gets me to the third point, which is maximize the work not done. Which means that in any given situation, you have to ask yourself, am I adding value by doing this? Is me working on this going to be significantly adding value to the entire process? Because, a lot of the times 20% of work produce 80% of the results, and we end up just doing a lot of things that don't significantly improve anything that we're doing. And that's a problem, because you end up wasting a ton of time and effort on things that, you could have taken that time and done something that actually really improved the work or the result that you were trying to achieve. Stupid work is always stupid work, and you can't get away from that. So if you're a programmer, think about every single line of code that you write. Is this adding value? Do I really need to do this? Is there a simpler way to do this? If you're an analyst and you're building a dashboard, think every single time you're adding a widget or a chart or a number or a metric, think, is this adding value to the person that is the main audience for this dashboard? Is this adding something that they need from this dashboard on a regular basis that adds value to what they need to know? If the answer is no, or even a maybe, you might really want to think hard about including that, because you're putting effort into actually building that particular chart or putting that number in, because you always have to have a query or something behind it, and doing that work might not actually make your dashboard significantly better. So think before you do, and try to maximize the work that you don't do, because then you have time for actually value adding things. Speaking of time boxing matters, and you should take it seriously. And what I mean by time boxing in this context is giving an event or work a time period that it has to happen within, and it can't go over that. It just can't. And there are already things that we time box technically. Say meetings, and meeting starts at one time and ends at one time. But the thing is, does it begin at one time and does it end at one time? Not a whole lot of times, and that is something that needs to stop. If you want to be efficient, and if you want to really incorporate these kinds of agile principles into your days, then if you are leading a meeting, make sure that if you schedule it for 45 minutes, you have an agenda that you have prioritized, so that the top most important items are discussed first, because that means that if there's something that at the end of the meeting is going to run out of time, you don't need to take up people's valuable time and extend the meeting over and potentially risk having someone late to their next meeting and being annoyed, because guess what? Most people, when they are late to their next meetings, or a meeting runs over and they can't be a part of that, follow-up discussion, it is annoying. It really is. And so time boxing things and making sure that you're prioritized when it comes to your agenda, and once time runs out, you take those conversations out of the meeting, or you're like, okay, I am going to schedule a follow-up meeting for the remaining items, but you don't actually go over with the meeting, because that's just freaking rude. And yeah, welcome to my TED Talk. No, but like seriously, take the concept of time boxing, because it's not the end of the world if you can't discuss everything when you're prioritized. Like, when you have the most important items out of the way, like maybe there are items that you can take later, or you can discuss in an email thread or whatever, but just don't make everyone late for everything because you can't manage a meeting. Everyone thanks you. And speaking of meetings, number 5 is prefer face-to-face communications. And I mean, I know it can be hard right now, we're working from home, but you can still schedule video calls with people. And why I think this is so important is that a lot of the times when we're working for a long period with someone over emails or over messages, you don't really know the tone of voice that they're using or the facial expressions that they're having, like when they're writing. I just get lost in translation, and that's not good for your communication. So especially with people that you work with on a regular basis on something long term. So for example, my stakeholders in my project, schedule regular one-to-ones, maybe 30 minutes on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, where if you have ongoing things, you can still work with that person online, but at the same time have that time where you have a video call or you meet in person and you discuss things. You can always cancel that, but having that standing time that if there are anything that you need to discuss about your work together, you have an opportunity to do that face to face and actually have that contact, because it also helps you build that relationship and make it more enjoyable for both of you to work long term. Because a lot of the times in an email you don't really have that sort of chit chat aspect, because that would be just weird. So when you're actually meeting someone face to face, you have that sort of almost like, let's get coffee, let's talk about work, but also I'm asking about your family. How did your cat's nail cutting go on the weekend, because you mentioned it the last time you spoke. And like all of those things that build an actual genuine relationship rather than just, you know, emailing someone and being a colleague and a coworker but not really knowing the person. Another key principle that Agile has is working sustainably. And what this means is that, as you might guess, your work output across time is the same. So you're not producing higher volumes of output on a given week and then for 3 weeks barely anything, or you're not working, you know, 80 hours per month and then like 40 for the next 3 months, but you're working sustainably across the entire project. Or, you know, it might not be a project, it just might be a work, but you're not burning yourself out because you don't have to push yourself to crunch something out at once. You can work in a way that is stable, consistent, and, you know, predictable. Because a lot of the times we don't have that predictability at our work, and that kind of messes with us. Like some weeks you feel really productive and some weeks you don't, and when you don't, it kind of feels very like you just kind of feel lazy. And so of course things like time off or meetings or whatever might change how much time you have in a week to work, but planning that work can actually really help you work in a way that is pretty much the same and helps you manage expectations with everyone you work with. Your work is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and Agile methodology, Scrum, you know, pun intended, you know, it's not a sprint, get it? Yep. But you need to be able to work sustainably for years, so burning yourself out doesn't really, you know, do you any good. And I've talked about my burnout in a video previously, so I'm going to link that up so you can look at it. It's the imposter syndrome video that I did, but I actually talk quite a bit about how I burned myself out, so that's there, that's on the internet. But yeah, so next I wanted to talk about number 7, and after the last one this might seem and sound a bit weird, but like start thinking about your work in sprints. And I don't mean as in a sprint in terms of running really fast and like getting a lot of shit done, but sprints in terms of Agile principles and Agile methodologies. So in Agile, a version of the software product is considered a release, and to get that release out you divide your time into sprints, and sprints are usually around like 1 or 2 to 4 weeks. It's usually not much longer than that, and it's a time period that you plan work for, and that's all it is. And so thinking about your time in those terms as well. You might not have an end product that you need to create, but you might just be thinking about what are you doing next week. So you can do this for your next week. What you need to do first is think about your next week and think about a realistic number of hours that you can work productively without distraction, you know, over the week. And spoilers, it's usually not 40. You need to take into account the fact that you need breaks, you need to eat, you probably don't work at full capacity all the time, you have meetings, and so deduct all of that out of those hours and figure out what it is. You know, say it's like 15 to 20 hours. And then once you have that number, look at all the things that you want to get done next week. Look at all the, you know, to-dos and projects and whatever, or emails, anything that you want to be done over the next week. And if you know that there's always some ad hoc stuff that is coming your way every single week, just have a time buffer. Like, be like, okay, the ad hoc stuff usually takes you like 3 hours, and so you have all of this to-do stuff that you need to get done. But then how do you fit it into 20 hours? Well, you go over each one, you figure out how long is this going to take. If something looks like it's going to take you a day or longer, break it into smaller pieces, because it's really hard to estimate something that's like kind of big. So break it into smaller tasks that you can do in order to complete the whole, and then look at how many hours is your to-do list going to take. And a lot of the times for me especially, that to-do list is longer than the time that I actually have in the week. So then what you do is you prioritize. What do you absolutely need to get done? Like, what is your number one priority? And then go down that list and prioritize things. What is the least important thing that is on that list? Maybe it's, you know, some kind of an email or whatever. I don't know what it is, but like, what's the least important thing? And then you drop it like it's hot. You have to be ruthless in your prioritization, because you can't schedule into your week more work than you can do. And that is an agile principle. It's like, when you have a sprint, you can schedule more into the sprint than you have time for. And that's kind of basic, but that's what it is. And so once you have number of hours that matches the number of hours of work that you have to get done during the week, because we don't believe in overtime on this channel, because overtime leads to burnout. You can leave a backlog of the things that weren't as important, because if you then figure out you actually have time, or something takes less time than you actually estimated, then you can add something in and actually complete those as well. But you don't schedule in more work than you have time for, okay? And that's one way of also creating predictability for people that you work with, because they also know that this is what I've scheduled for this week, and I'll get to these other items if I have time, but I might not, and realistically this is what I'm going to get done. It makes it easy for other people to understand like where you are with your workload, because then if you have multiple weeks where you have less to do than you have time for, then you can start helping others out. Or if for several weeks in a row you can't get enough done in that week, that's a resource problem. That's not a you problem, it's a resource problem. When you cannot complete your work in that 40 hours a week, it's not a you problem, it's a resource problem. Then it's not over. At the end of each week in Agile, at the end of every sprint, you do a sprint review and a sprint retrospective. Sprint review is usually a demo of what you got done and feedback on it. Maybe in your case, you review everything that got done that week and you go over that and you give feedback for yourself. What did I get done? Did I get it done like to the extent that I wanted to get it done? And make sure that if there's anything left, that goes then into your next week's to-do list. And then a sprint retrospective of looking at your process. How was your evaluation of things? How did you do? What did you do well? What could you improve during that sprint? How did you work? And just reflecting on what you were doing, because, and this is kind of going to be a 7.5 sort of a thing, but in Agile you reflect on a regular basis, and I think it's really important for anyone's career. So technically this should be a principle of improving your work based on Agile, but I'll kind of couple it with this. Because I think at least on a weekly basis, it's really good to just sit down and figure out what did you do well this week and what could you improve for next week. Because when you do that on a regular basis, you kind of set an intention for yourself consciously to improve what you do. So that's kind of 7.1, 7.5, I don't know. Look at your sprints and reflect often. Good advice. And for the last part, number 8, I want to talk about consciously building functional team culture. And if you think about it, no one really became successful by trying to be the superstar or taking all the credit or pushing other people down. Nah. How people that you probably admire, you've seen their work and you look up to them, are probably incredibly good team players. They give credit where credit is due, and probably even more. And they appreciate others and they really show it, and that is a way to actually build constructive, positive, functional team culture where everyone feels safe sharing their feedback, you know, what they're working on, maybe any struggles that they're having or obstacles. And that's really important, and that's a huge principle in Agile, and that is something that I think you should be really careful about in terms of how you interact with your colleagues and your stakeholders is to make sure that you're being constructive, you're being positive, and you're looking at things from a perspective of how do we improve things rather than laying blame or pointing fingers and taking credit where it's not necessarily yours to take, and you know, all the stuff that you probably look at in other people that do that and don't quite like. And yeah, that doesn't really build a good team culture, and a good team culture is so important to actually doing really great work and becoming successful, because when people around you are doing well, they usually lift you up rather than, you know, push you down. So it's not away from you if your entire team wins, you know? I think if you want to become successful and if you really want to do good work, you need to be a good team player and you need to learn how to work with others. And those were the 8 things and kind of a half that I learned from Agile methodology that I am going to be implementing in my work, because I think they're really important to doing your best work and actually working better, working more efficiently, being more effective. And yeah, that is my takeaway on those. I hope you liked this video. I hope you found it helpful. If any of these resonated with you, if any of these tips are something that you are going to take back and implement in your work, leave a comment down below and let me know. I love to hear everything that you are taking away from these videos. And if you really enjoyed this, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!